On this episode of the Ethics Experts, we talk to Professor Anthony Palma at Fordham, and we talk about all kinds of everything ethics. We talk about the role that ethics plays in driving better bottom line, better culture, the 3 takeaways to always speak up, always show up, don't take shortcuts. You're really going to enjoy this one.
Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Ethics Experts. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, hey bestie, hope you're having an amazing day. The world's a better place because you're in it. You see what happens when you subscribe to the Ethics Experts? You get a bonus greeting on every single episode. So hit that subscribe button and join us as we change the world. I'm here with Professor Anthony Palma of the Fordham School of Law and Fordham University Graduate School of Business Administration. How's it going, Anthony?
Good. Very well. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, I'm excited to get you on the Ethics Experts. I love Fordham. I love what you guys do for the community, and it's just a great school. How did you get involved with Fordham?
I was on their board of advisors and was asked by the dean about 12, 13 years ago if I would be interested in joining the faculty. And I said, well, tell me what it's all about. He explained it to me. I started with one class. I said, well, let's see if I like it, if you like me. I like teaching. The students, the faculty, the dean liked me, so they hired me.
And so what were you doing before?
Prior to that, I was in financial services for most of my career in various internal control oversights organizations. How I got involved in ethics is that I was asked to join an understaffed fraud investigation unit at a financial services firm. That unit investigated allegations of fraud, misconduct, that were reported through the ethics hotline. And that started me, studying and researching, ethics and doing the right thing, which you'll probably hear me say a dozen times during our conversation.
So why don't we start at the beginning of your story? How did you wind up in financial services? What did you want to be when you were a young guy, and how did that path change as you grew up?
Sure. Well, I'm a graduate of Fordham undergraduate and the Graduate School of Business Administration. I did postgraduate studies at New York University, Monmouth University, in the New School, and I was deciding about a business or career, which way to go. I wound up getting a job in financial services and portfolio management at a large bank that's no longer in existence. And I saw something happen there that really got me interested in ethics. One was that I saw a portfolio manager at the end of every month increasing the market values of the securities that he held in his portfolio accounts. Increasing the prices, increasing his profits. Therefore, he was able to get big increases in compensation. I saw that and I said, gosh, if this person's getting away with this, well, this is wrong. And I was new to the business world, and that's how I got my start in studying the rights and wrongs of the business world.
Isn't that funny? Like, you kind of have this picture of what the business world is like. That's how it was for me. I remember coming out of undergrad and being so excited about getting into the real world and seeing how real business is done. And, because you have all these case studies and, I kind of had this picture of how it all worked. And then when I got into the real world, as it were, I just remember having this I don't know, it felt like there was a bucket of cold water dumped on me or something. And I was just shocked at what a mess it was. It just was so different than what I expected.
Yeah, it's an eye opener, and at some points a little disappointing.
Yeah, that is true, right? I guess it is a little disappointing. What was going through your mind when you saw that? When you saw the ease with which this person, obviously it's a ethics issue, it's a integrity issue, it's a maybe perhaps lack of internal controls issue. What was going through your mind when you were kind of uncovering that, and give us a little sense of when that was?
It was many years ago, early in my career, early 80s. And what bothered me when I was working for this person, what bothered me was that if this person was doing it, one, was everybody else doing it?
Right.
And two, has anybody, if this person is the only person doing this, has someone mentioned to leadership that, hey, I'm giving this person the monthly closing prices that I'm getting, from the New York Stock Exchange or wherever, and then when I get the report, they're kind of different. So those are the two things. Is everybody else doing this? And if not, has anybody notified management that this is happening?
Where did, you said it was a little disheartening, but it's not like you ran from the industry. It seems like you kind of went deeper in the industry and like tried to, your career as somebody who's been trying to fix this thing and trying to sort of promote doing the right thing. Yeah. Where did that come from? Where did that sort of drive to fix it come from, you think?
It just came from my own personal values. What I do is I try to bring my own personal values to different businesses. And as someone new out of school, I was trying to learn the ropes. A question might come, well, Tony, why didn't you say anything? And I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know who to ask. I didn't know what to say. So my questioning of a lot of things comes from how I attribute my own personal values to the business world.
Yeah, and there's sort of like a high agency that comes with like value forward people, because they're not like willing to settle. This is just my own experience. They're not willing to settle for the way things are, and they're willing to sort of fight for the way things should be. Do you feel like that's been a drive in you?
I've always been fighting for it. Yes, it has been. Yes, it has been. I have to tell you a quick story at the school. So I teach undergraduate and graduate ethics courses. They're required by the school, at the business school. And I opened up the first class with the question: if you go to a drugstore in Manhattan near Duane Reade's, you buy a toothbrush for $1.59, you give the clerk $5, the clerk gives you back change for a 10, what do you do? And so there's some stunned silence. What is professor doing? Is he tricking us? And I say, it's not a trick question. What would you do? And some students would volunteer and say, well, you give it back. And I say, answer honestly, right? There's an ethics class, and answer honestly. This conversation is not going anywhere. It stays in the classroom. Other students say, well, I made, $7. And I said, well, we're going to teach you to think differently about that in this class. So I've been fighting that mindset with students, with the large organizations, with small organizations.
Do you feel like it is that is movable in people? I mean, what I find is when someone gets that back, it's some people are always going to give the money back, right? Some people are going to be like Abe Lincoln and they're going to walk 5 miles to give back the penny or whatever. Yeah. Other people are going to say, well, it's Duane Reade. They're not going to, this is a rounding error for them. Like, people are going to rationalize it other ways. So that's kind of maybe the middle. And then there's this other bucket of people that are really trying to beat the system, or they're very opportunistic or something. Like, do you feel like that's kind of, those are the main buckets? And do you feel like we can truly move people from bucket to bucket?
Yeah, yes, those are the main buckets. And yes, I'm adamant about changing the person that says, well, I beat the system, I made $7, And I try to teach those people, both the students and in the business world, that you will feel better. The organization will feel better. The organization will thrive if you do the right thing. It's a win-win for everyone.
Where do you think that thinking comes from corporately? Is it just the amalgamation of all these people in sort of bucket 2 and 3 in my example, that just sort of averages out? Is it a mentality that it's sort of dollars over everything, kind of individualistic economy we're in, where it's a zero-sum game? Like, what do you think that's rooted in, and why is? I mean, I find most people to be like relatively honest. So why is it like corporately this is like a battle that we're still fighting and talking about?
Sure. I think there are 2 reasons. One is that C-suite leaders do not lead or direct by example. That's one. And 2, organizations are concentrating on the bottom line only. They're not looking at other stakeholders and how that could lead to even a better bottom line.
So we talk a lot about that Milton Friedman article, and I kind of use that as a kind of watershed moment where it seems like a mentality shift occurred where it's really all about that bottom line thinking. So let's just, for the sake of this, discussion, assume that that was in fact sort of the pivot point. How have you seen us maybe, like if the world is a pendulum, or, these topics are pendulums that swing, how have you seen, through your career, companies maybe drift so far toward that sort of bottom line thinking, shareholders over everything, profit over everything, versus it's, do you feel like it's starting to swing back? Like, talk to us a little bit about that path and what do you think's been driving that?
Yeah, I think we are moving the pendulum in a more positive way, and that's being driven by people who are watching this podcast, people who feel the same way that we do, calling ethics hotlines or and contacting people and raising their hand and saying, "I see this going on. I don't know. I have a question about it. It probably needs to be addressed and corrected." So I think companies using that paradigm is causing the pendulum to swing to a better company. More people are raising their hands to that whistleblower option.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at SEC whistleblower complaints over the last 5, 7, 10 years, I mean, they've been absolutely skyrocketing. And I don't think that's simply an expansion driven by population growth, right? I don't think it's that, because it's growing at a much higher rate than, the number of professionals who are in this space. It seems like there's sort of a new secular trend of exactly what you're talking about. More people willing to speak up. Do you think that's like a generational thing? Like, what do you think's driving that? Is it just we're tired of the profits over everything approach? Is it a different prioritization? You're kind of close to it because you're seeing people who are in school right now, right? There's several, different sort of categories of generations, I'm sure that you come in contact with and have come in contact with over the last 13 years. How has that sort of, the general ethos of those groups changed over time? Like, what have you noticed?
I think people are tired of seeing bad actors at companies. I think people are tired of seeing things go wrong at companies. One case study that I use is BP and BP Horizon. Tony Hayward, the CEO, classic press conference on the beach. I want to get my life back. Well, that shows you his leadership and what he was thinking. But again, I think people are just tired of these bad things happening. Let's fix them. And if they're fixed, everybody will do well, all the shareholders and the corporation.
So let's go back to, I happen to agree with you. It seems like it's, we've kind of had enough and there has to be a better way. And we've sort of explored this profits over everything type of, mentality. And I think you're right. I think people are sick of it. I want to go back to when how your involvement at Fordham has changed. Because like you said, you started with one course. What was that course and how has that expanded? Because now you're teaching in 2 schools and you're teaching graduate and all that kind of stuff. Was that little by little all at once type of a thing? Or was it just sort of like a gradual expansion? And what areas are you typically talking about?
So I started as part of the finance program, the graduate finance program. The first course I taught was current issues in global finance. That went well, would you be and then I said, well, a couple of things we're missing here in the finance program are courses like governance and compliance, things like that. So my direction at the business school, just kind of grew from there. Hey, here's what we're missing. The ethics courses are part of the business law department at the business school, and I saw the courses they were teaching. I said maybe I could just help expand those courses, and that's what happened. I just developed a reputation for teaching. The students liked me. The faculty liked me. The law school heard about me, and they said, "Hey, Tony, why don't you come over? Let's talk about what you could do for us."
So when you're talking about governance and compliance in the graduate program, and you're talking versus like what you're talking about from an ethics perspective in the law school, what are you talking, like what's different about those conversations? Are, like where are the focuses different and where are they the same?
Yeah, they kind of go together, right? I start out with ethics and things like that, and how corporate governance will affect the ethical culture of the organization. And then, of course, then one step further, compliance. There are policies and procedures, rules and regulations that we have to follow. And that's part of the whole ethical journey at a corporation. So I started ethics and then go to those other topics. And that seems to work.
Okay, so walk me through that a little bit. I like that. I like that framework. I don't know if I've thought about it in that way. What's the chicken and what's the egg in that, in that example?
I start with ethics and ethical values and making the right decisions, and how those right decisions will positively impact all the stakeholders of an organization and the organization in general in terms of revenue. And then I talk to the students and people about navigating governance. Well, what is governance? How an organization is organized, and how employees navigate those different powers, those different organizations. And then the rules of the road are compliance. This is what we should be doing, and this is what we should be following, and they're ethical standards. And if you follow those rules, things should go well. So chicken and the egg, I don't know. I start with ethics, then go to governance, and then the policy in compliance.
Yeah, because I guess the policy, and I like the way you put that those are kind of the rules of the road. Where do you? Let me just ask this way.
Sure.
Where do you think? So there's this kind of sort of like broad issue in compliance where like compliance has a branding problem within their organizations, and people are scared of compliance and they're scared to raise their hand. They don't want to get in trouble. And you have these compliance departments who are trying to crowdsource risk intelligence at scale, which, requires the participation of the employee base, but there's this sort of wall between them. And then we've seen recently sort of this attempt of rebrand, I guess, where people are building, calling themselves the ethics and compliance department and so forth. Where do you think companies get that wrong in terms of how they interact with the workforce? And, what do you think they should, like, how do you think like a compliance and ethics department should think about itself as a, department within a company to get more of that engagement that will ultimately, to your point, drive the better business performance, more revenue, better bottom line, all those other, second and third order externalities?
Here's the issue that I've been fighting. Ethics and compliance organizations do a great job. They're hard workers. They want to do the right thing. But they're not revenue producing business units. And a lot of times what I found is that compliance and ethics will raise problems, raise issues to business unit senior management, and senior management will push back saying, well, this client is, we're generating X amount of revenue from this client. Right. What do you want me to do? They filled out all the forms, we know them, they're right. Okay. So that's a problem that organizations are facing. While compliance and ethics are trying to do a good job, they're fighting an uphill battle with the revenue producers of the organization. And typically senior management will defer to the revenue producers. Having said that, when the revenue producers get in trouble, and there are numerous examples where compliance raised their hand and nothing was done, that's when you get the black eye and you're paying fines and you get a bad reputation, things like that.
So I think you're right. And the way I've kind of thought about this, I've gotten into some debates with folks, friendly debates, I'll tell you, debates with folks about, what is the true value of an ethics and compliance department for an organization? And I think most people will say that it is a, the like low level base is, well, we just need to have it. I think the next level would say it's really about, cost avoidance, essentially, right? Reputational damage, lawsuit avoidance, things like that. That's a cost minimization thing. Yeah. Or maybe it's an efficiency mechanism that allows us to, hey, we're going to paint clear lines on the road, and so our car of commerce can sort of drive faster, in our pursuit of our mission or whatever. Yeah. I think it's actually, which kind of can, I think, be a little bit more persuasive to those people who are trying to balance, well, I have these revenue producers over here, and this is what we care about. I also want to do the right thing. I think given our current climate and our current priorities that the workforce has allows for us to really point to a bottom line expansion from this silent killer inside the organization, which is employee engagement and employee turnover. Yeah. So, almost 2/3 or a little bit over 2/3 of people during the Great Resignation who left their companies left it on some values basis on a primary or secondary reason. They didn't believe the values of the company. They thought, if they spoke up, no one was going to do anything about it. They thought that there was preferential treatment for, to your point, the revenue producers versus, everybody else. And with labor mobility being so high and the cost of changing jobs being lower than it's ever been, it's been easy for people to jump the fence and, check out whether that pasture is actually greener or not, right? Sure. And when you couple that dynamic and that, catalyst for people to change jobs, when you combine that with the cost of turnover, which is like somewhere between 6 and 18 months, depending on what study you look at, massive cost, 6 or 18 months of a person's salary. And you add on the the global employee engagement rate is below 70%. So we're paying out 100% of somebody's salary, and they're only pushing the foot on the gas pedal 70% kind of on average. There is a massive opportunity, and again, it's hard to put this into a spreadsheet. I understand that, but there's a massive opportunity for us to begin to reap those positive benefits from a culture that people seem to be. From an integrity forward culture that people seem to be prioritizing, that's going to show up in lower turnover and going to show up in higher employee engagement. And I think when an ethics and compliance department can make their case, not only just talking about the pain avoidance, not only just talking about the efficiency gains, but also including the seeking of pleasure, those three things I just mentioned are the three reasons that people do anything. When they can incorporate that adds some dimensionality to the impact that this culture can have on the things that those people care about, which is bottom line expansion. And again, this probably better than anybody. Ethisphere puts this thing out every year of the world's most ethical companies, and you look back year after year, they're always outperforming the S&P or whatever the sort of benchmark is, right? It's happening all the time. Yeah. Why do you think we have such, so we see this report, we see this gap between the ethical companies and, everybody else. Why do we have such a hard time sort of translating that benefit into, action or more power or more budget within our organization to those people at the top who control the purse strings?
I think that's the problem. It all comes from the tone at the top. How are senior leaders behaving? What are they telling their employees? How are they doing business? All those issues that you just mentioned come from what employees are viewing as leadership deficiencies, right? Okay. I'm on the board of a company that leadership is very clear about what they want. They're very focused. They ask their employees. And this is not just, check the box, these town halls or luncheons. They ask their employees, how are we doing? The leader can't know everything. Right. The leader needs to surround himself or herself with smart people. And the most successful companies are asking their stakeholders, how are we doing? How can we improve? What are our problems and how can we fix them? So the problem, Nick, to all those things that you mentioned, it's coming from senior leadership.
I think that's right. It's been an interesting, I think it's been a bit of an interesting shift from the shareholder prioritization to the stakeholder prioritization that I think we're seeing more and more companies look at their world from that sort of perspective. It's been an interesting shift because as you shift to stakeholders, then you start to kind of consider that my game is not just marketing. it's not just sort of sales. There's other sort of constituent groups that I need to get information from, right? Like my employer brand, the brand that I am to my employees, that can give me great information about, well, how are we actually living out our values? Are we actually pursuing our mission and so forth? Have you seen that like wall break down between the external and the internal brand? And do you feel like it's still pretty separate?
There are some holes in that wall. It's still pretty separate, but the walls are slowly coming down. It's a long process, and a lot of people have to buy into that before those walls come down. But it's still, the wall is still there. The wall is still there.
So I mean, if you just go back 13 years ago and you just take a snapshot of your sort of average class, and you compare that to like an average class today, do you feel like the prioritization of like those students has changed in terms of like what they value and what they're looking for from, a company that they spend their money at, or a company that they sort of are willing to add to their resume? And like and if you do, like how do we accelerate that more and push that change in mentality kind of higher in the organizations so that we can put more and more holes in those walls? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So the difference over the past 13, 14, 15 years is that students are becoming, as they see more opportunities, they're becoming more empowered to go in a direction that they want to go in. You have the students that want to go to investment banking and work 7 days a week and make a lot of money. But you have the other students that say, well, that industry doesn't thrill me. I want to do something more to contribute to the company, to the employees, and to society. So the thought process and the attitudes of students for sure has changed. And that's because of the multiple national and global opportunities, that they have.
Got it. So you'd say that prioritization has changed as a function of sort of external opportunities, expansion.
I think that, yes, I would do. Yes, that's exactly what I would say.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I've thought about it a little bit differently. I think it absolutely has changed. And, maybe this is like too high of a level, but when I look at, my grandfather's generation, I think their priorities were very different because, well, maybe this is what you're saying, but, my grandfather came back from World War II and like he bought a house immediately, and my grandmother didn't have to work, and like, achieving that American dream of finding a great company and getting a pension and retiring in, your 50s or whatever, that was like readily available. And then if you look at like Gen Z right now, home ownership's lower than it's ever been. The massive amount of debt has, everybody's saddled with all this debt. School costs have gone up. So it seems like the achievement of that sort of traditional American dream is like so much further away that like a higher proportion of those folks don't even think that like they can achieve it. And thus, what can they achieve, right? Like something's going to fill that top slot in your like order of priorities. And I think it, just to use the kind of like a broad brushstroke, if the American dream used to be the top thing was to be a millionaire, and if nobody thinks they can be a millionaire now, well, then what's the top thing? Is it's life enjoyment, or it's feeling good about the place that I go to work and so forth. And I think that prioritization, which maybe to your point is like just a different sort of priority or a different opportunity set, causes us to sort of act different in the reality that we're living in.
Yeah, people, students, they're looking for more balance. They're looking for more personal satisfaction. They're looking to contribute more. And I think that those are the changes that have taken place for sure during COVID.
Right.
But I think that started filtering up earlier than COVID, as global opportunities began to appear to people.
Yeah. Do you feel like COVID kind of accelerated that a little bit?
It did for sure. Yeah. Now people are saying, well, in the COVID environment, people began to examine as they saw the toll that COVID was taking place on, young and old people. They began to question, well, what am I really doing now?
Yeah, right.
What
am I doing with my life?
Yeah, exactly. What am I doing with my life, and what do I want to do with my life? And then that led people to, just go in a different direction. They weren't going to just work, the 14-hour days for money.
Hmm.
They weren't interested in buying a house. Maybe they were interested in opening up their own business and getting more self-satisfaction of meeting personally with customers every day and opening their shop and closing and looking at those satisfied stakeholders, the customers, the employees, et cetera. Yeah.
I'd love to go back. So I think that's absolutely spot on. It's been so interesting to kind of see how the tides have changed and how we're seeing organizations react to that changing side, or that changing tide rather. How do you see organizations dealing with that? Do you feel like, because I mean, everything's a spectrum, right? And you have some who are like very nimble and they're like getting it. They seem to have their ear to the ground, and they're, some organizations are frankly like ahead of that kind of curve. And then I see some other ones that seem to be like a little bit behind it, or they're trying to kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of greenwash their way through it. How are you seeing like companies interact with that, and what would you tell, a CEO or a panel of CEOs that they should, start to consider in order to not get sort of left behind by these changing sentiments of the workforce, which are ultimately going to determine the extent to which they can achieve their organizational goals and their organizational mission?
Yeah, well, smaller companies are much more nimble, and they're able to make decisions and go in a more ethical and compliance road than the larger organizations. The larger organizations, it takes a lot of work. The smaller companies, the CEO, board, and senior management are usually hands-on. So that's good. The larger companies, a lot of administrative stuff that they have to go through, a lot of buy-in they have to go through. And what I tell when I'm giving speeches or, I'm meeting with corporate leaders, I tell them, in order to change, in order to adopt, you have to listen. I might have mentioned this before. You have to listen to your stakeholders. What are they seeing? What are they feeling? What did they want? And the stakeholders are what? Employees, customers, regulators. There's a whole list
Yep.
that can go on. So I think that's the key in changing the mindset of the larger companies. Smaller companies, it's easy.
Yeah, it is easy. And then I think, I think that's well put. I think also there's this like short-term ism or something. I don't know what the word is, but like this sort of short-term thinking, and again, like a high level of labor mobility where, I've seen it before where somebody comes into an organization and they have these like high hopes and, they're going to kind of change the world, and maybe they hit a lot of red tape or they hit a lot of like these sort of administrative impediments that you kind of alluded to. And at some point they're like, screw this, I'm going to go kind of do something else. And then all that sort of, when you're pushing a train, not that I've ever pushed one, but like you have to put a lot of effort to kind of get that thing moving and start to build that momentum up. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of situations where somebody starts to push that train and maybe they start getting some movement and they're like, this is not really worth it anymore. And then all that work is kind of left for somebody else to take over.
Yeah. So persistence overcomes resistance. And what we have to show senior leadership, we have to convince them of the benefits of doing something. Benefit for the organization, benefit to senior leadership, benefit for the customers. What are the benefits to making these changes? I think that's the key to get buy-in.
So I think that's right. So, but how do we do that, right? Like you were saying before, it's really all about the tone at the top and how the organization prioritizes those things. And if an organization is full of leaders that have an open ear and they're trying to hear from these different stakeholders and they're willing to make those changes, then that's one thing. If, and then fine, we have sociopaths over here. The battleground, I think, is really in the middle who, maybe they're well-intending people, but they haven't had that light bulb turned on at the top to see what those benefits are. Who drives that change? Like, you seem like a high agency guy. What would you tell another high agency person in their organization to like help turn that light bulb on? Like, how do we convince them of those benefits to start driving that change? I mean, it's clear to me. It's very clear to you. It's clear. It's probably clear to all of our listeners, but I feel like I talk to so many people where they feel like they're like hitting a wall or they don't know how to like articulate this benefit this multiplicative benefit, frankly, to those people to get that higher on their own personal priority list.
Yeah. So I tell senior leaders when I'm meeting with them or in my speeches to them or the boards, you don't know everything. You're not necessarily the smartest person in the room. You should be listening to what people are telling you and adopt those ideas if feasible, and if not, make an adjustment to adopt them. But you've got to listen to what's happening out there. I think that's the key. That's the driver. The senior leadership has to listen, and a lot of time, and that's a difficult challenge because they think, well, I'm CEO because I am the smartest person in the room, and I know more than you do. And then there are examples of why people get frustrated is that a large global financial services bank got into a lot of trouble with a lot of things that were going wrong ethically, compliance, just a lot of things during the course of 1 year. It was 2 or 3 things. People were let go. Salary and bonuses were not increased a lot. The board gave the CEO a big raise.
Right.
So what kind of message is that to the employees? I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm
Right.
giving these ideas, and we're failing. I'm trying to correct it. I don't get a raise, but the CEO, who is not involved in the day-to-day life of my world, it says, "Oh, I didn't know anything about it." Those are the underlings. So that's the message that CEOs need to change to their stakeholders. Very few CEOs will do that, and I think that's because a lot of boards, compensation committees, and when boards vote for compensation for their leaders, they feel that the leaders are doing a good job on the bottom line, and they don't want that leader to leave.
Yeah, that's like the main criterion, right?
It is, but what I tell the boards is that you're missing
Totally.
the whole boat.
Totally.
Your bottom line can increase exponentially if you just change the way you're doing business.
Yeah, and more sustainably. Not these wild swings that are maybe it's easy to misattribute the driver of that change. That could be a market-driven change, or that could be 100 different things. It's not necessarily the business itself is, truly comprised of people that are, at the end of the day, willing to put forth that extra effort. Over a long period of time, I think employee engagement is the number one driver of outperformance. It's not, I just came up with a great product. I mean, whatever, Apple came up with, or whatever, BlackBerry came up with a really cool, way to get email on your phone, and then that sort of, that differentiator was replicated or improved upon, and that just wasn't a sustainable competitive advantage. To your point, I think the sustainable competitive advantage is a culture that allows people to put their gifts to work, and that, where they feel good putting that extra effort forward.
Yeah. This brewery in Colorado I referred to earlier. There's employee engagement. People are coming up with ideas.
Right.
Different. I'm not a drinker, but employees are coming up with different types of beers. They're talking about how to, maybe change the light bulbs to be more energy efficient. Create different ways of doing things, and the company grows their revenues, and then the company actually shares, those revenues with the employees. But again, it's a small company, and they can be nimble in doing this.
Yeah, and I wonder.
That's the model.
The model. That is the model. And again, if you look at a company like Google, we're as a company reading this book called Measure What Matters, and it's a story of essentially how the application of this OKR objectives and key results framework allowed Google to really ramp forward. And what they were able to get out of that framework was a high level of employee engagement and a bunch of, they were able to carve out time for Google engineers to work on their own ideas. And some of those ideas ended up becoming massive moneymakers for the organization. I mean, it's kind of what you're talking about at this brewery at scale. Yeah. And I just, I'm kind of thinking back to what you said, it comes down to, whether leadership is willing to, listen to this feedback and willing to do something about it. And I just wonder, like, as a company gets big or as somebody's comp gets so like high, there's a natural, like, you kind of start to lose touch. There's this old show, 30 Rock, which is pretty funny. And Alec Baldwin plays this character of, the CEO of the division. And he's like comically out of touch. There's this one scene where he says, how much does a gallon of milk cost? $30 or something? And this is before all the inflation, okay? But like, he's so out of touch because he makes so much money and so forth. Like, do you think it's a lack of humility as you get so high in an organization that's that big that you're like, I am the smartest person in the room? Like, you kind of start to read your own headlines. Do you think it's like, I'm making so much money that I'm just so out of touch? Or like, because at a smaller organization, yes, they're nimble. Yes, to your point, the CEO is like more hands-on. And they're scrappier. Their sleeves are rolled up. They're kind of in it. Yeah. Like, how do we bridge that? I mean, do you feel like I'm touching on something that's like foundational here?
Yeah, I think as a leader goes up the organization to the C-suite or the CEO, they believe they've gotten there because of their own ideas and that they know more than anybody else. And then they begin to believe that and make decisions based on the idea that I know more and this is the right decision. Most of those are older companies, right? The new companies, the Googles, to your point, and other new companies, they're a lot more nimble. It's the older companies in all industry categories, financial services, oil companies, all of them, where the senior leaders are slow to admit that they don't know everything, and they're not willing to listen, to others that might have other ideas, and they're afraid. Then authority is not being challenged, but they view it like that. Yeah.
So, there's so much irony in it, though. Like, that old story about Socrates where he said, I'm the smartest man in Greece because I know nothing. If that's true, then like what we just described in sort of this archetypal, stereotypical CEO of a larger organization who thinks, he's right all the time. I mean, that's the antithesis of that sort of Socratic thinking. You know what I'm saying? So it's like low wisdom. You're getting paid so much because you think it's all you when, luck and chance and time happen to all of us, There's a lot of smart people that aren't in those positions, and there's a lot of like arrogant people that wind up in those positions. That's not necessarily like the driver for that success, to your point,
Yeah, great leaders surround themselves with really smart people. Perhaps smarter than themselves, usually smarter than themselves, and again, they listen to what their subordinates and their colleagues are saying, and then if given all the information, then they're able to make the decision.
I just wondered, this is like philosophical, but like, sure. If somebody has already been to that other side, been to the dark side, do you think they can ever come back without sort of hitting rock bottom? Because like, it's kind of a humility issue. It's like to be able to say, I don't have all the answers and I'm willing to listen to other people, or I'm willing to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, starts with believing that there are people that are smarter than you, which a lot of people don't believe that, to your point.
If a leader does not have that mindset, he or she is not going to adapt to that.
Yeah.
The leader that thinks he or she can do no wrong and makes all the decisions, when something blows up, and there are numerous examples, right? CBS, GE, CNN, they just fall from their perch, pretty quickly, and some of them rise somewhere else, but others you never hear from again. I know many leaders that were like that. They were on television. They were the greatest leaders. Something went wrong, and you don't hear from them again.
Yeah, isn't that wild? I mean, that is so wild. And I mean, you see that with actors, and you see that with I was watching a documentary, and I think it was like about a musician, and they were talking about the good old days, and it's like that was 20 years ago, and that was like a relatively short period of time in their life, and it's all so fleeting. Have you seen that BlackBerry movie?
I have not.
Oh, you'd love it. And so it's obviously about research in motion, how they went from nothing to something, and then crashed when the iPhone came out, and like there was a wild level of hubris at the top. And to your point, that prevented them from being nimble and considering risks that were actually headwinds for the organization that ended up driving their stock down to nothing.
Yeah, well, here's the problem with the research in motion and Bed Bath and Beyond and others. They didn't move quickly enough to adjust to the changing demands of the consumer. Mm-hmm. They didn't listen. They just didn't listen.
It's the same story. You're right.
Yeah, it's a consistent theme. They're not listening. They're not paying attention. What I tell senior leaders is that, you have a good product here, but are your competitors building a better product?
Right.
And if so, what is it, and how do you adjust to stay in front, or you yourself build a better product?
I mean, this has been a lot of fun, and I really learned a lot here. And our organization, I mean, the key to business is listening, I guess. You have to listen to your clients. You have to listen in individual sales conversations. You have to listen to your employees. It really is the key. And I guess I didn't really kind of put that together. Our organization, among other things, sells whistleblower solutions. And I'm obviously an advocate for that because it's benefited my own life, like being able to speak up. And I just see so much benefit for an organization when they can, listen. But it really does it on the macro and the micro level. Listening is really the key. I just don't think I've put that together before.
Yeah, it is. And one takeaway I wanted to give all your viewers and listeners is that always do the right thing, no matter how long it takes or no matter what the toll is. Always do the right thing.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
Whether you see something wrong and you call the whistleblower hotline, or where your division wants a product out by September 30th, it's not ready to go. It's not going to be ready to go. It's not going to be the right product on September 30th. Raise your hand and say, look, if we move this out, it's going to be recalled, in a month. Raise your hand. Step up, speak up. Always raise your hand and tell your colleagues, tell your boss, hey, this is what I think based on what I'm seeing. Here's my opinion.
Well, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying, at the start of your story, where it's easy to get disheartened. And I think when you get disheartened by what you're seeing or what you seem to be surrounded with, it's easy to let that apathy take hold. And I think, to your point, we have to fight that. And we have to, in order to do the right thing all the time, you have to be willing to sort of be that change that you want to see in the world and not give up on your vision of what the future is.
Yeah, and that comes from a person's own, personal values. Persistence.
Yeah, you're right.
Persistence overcomes resistance. You see something. Whoever said that, Nancy Reagan or somebody. If you see something, say something. Raise your hand. Speak up. Be part of it.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's jump in the time machine and let's go find a young Tony. What piece of advice do you wish you had earlier in your career?
I kind of thought you were going to answer that question, and it goes back to always do the right thing. Don't take shortcuts. Always speak up. A lot of times I didn't speak up when I probably should have. Always do the right thing. Speak up. Don't take shortcuts. I think those are the three takeaways. If I had somebody tell me that when I was 21 or 22. I probably would have been a better employee, a better innovator, a better leader.
I love it. Well, Professor Palma, thank you so much for joining us, man. This was a great discussion. Totally lived up to my expectations, which were pretty high coming in. So great to meet you. Great to have you on the show. Where can people find you, other than taking one of your famous courses?
Sure. If anybody's interested in contacting me and asking any questions or providing thoughts, my email is best. I'm pretty good with the emails. Apalma, Palma, @fordham.edu. and be happy to answer questions or give advice or just listen to what you have to say.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you all next time. Take care.